Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Home Secretary has urged people not to go on public protests during the pandemic, no matter how important the cause. It comes after 200 protests took place across the UK over the weekend. Priti Patel said she supports the right to protest in principle and talked of offensive racist language used against her over the years. She praised the actions of the police and the peaceful majority of protesters, but criticised the violent minority, saying their hooliganism was indefensible. And in a reference to the toppling of the statue of a slave trader in Bristol, she said it's not for mobs to tear down statues. More protests following the death of George Floyd in the United States have taken place today. Here's our political editor, Laura Kuhnsberg.
Black, listen. Black is beautiful, black is excellent, black is love, black is...
A 7-year-old on the stage.
Colour, black books on my bookshelves.
A protest, not a picnic, in Cheltenham this afternoon. After 200 demonstrations over the weekend, the majority making the urgent call for black equality came in peace. But the minority, who seemed to spoil for a fight, met the government's frustration too.
Racism and discrimination in any form have no place in our society. And to the criminal minority who have subverted this cause with their thuggery, I simply say this: your behaviour is shameful and you will face justice.
Now is not the moment for divisive rhetoric. Instead, this is a time for the government to listen, to learn and to act.
Does the Home Secretary recognise that there's structural inequality, discrimination and racism in our country? Does the Home Secretary recognise that people want to see action from this government?
But the Home Secretary detailed the racially offensive language she faced in her past.
I'm really saddened that the Honourable Lady has effectively said that this government doesn't understand racial inequality. Well, on that basis, Madam Deputy Speaker, it must have been a very different Home Secretary who, as a child, was frequently called a packie in the playground.
The anger's been easy to see. A statue of a well-known 18th century slave trader and politician torn down in Bristol yesterday. What's behind the fury, though? It's not just history or profound racial unrest in America. There's plenty of evidence that the UK's black population, around 3% in the last census, is too often left behind. The gaps illustrated in a major official audit for the government that showed black people are most likely to be in a low-income household, in a lower-skilled job or unemployed at 9% of the population, more than twice the white percent of unemployment, higher than 6% of the Asian community. At school, 39% of black pupils got good passes in English and Maths GCSE, 43% of white pupils and 50% of Asian pupils. But 35 black people out of every 1,000 were arrested in 2017 to 18, 10 white and 12 from the Asian community. And remember, people from ethnic minority backgrounds are harder hit by coronavirus too. Just one reason why there's been so much disquiet about these gatherings. Even though some were wearing masks, any crowd clashes with government regulation to guard everyone's health. Hundreds and thousands of people here, not careful groups of no more than 6.
My message is we have a long and proud history of enabling protest in this country. You know, that everybody thinks is a good thing to do. Right now, express your anger, make your points in other ways than turning out on the street in a mass gathering, which is unsafe and against the coronavirus regulation.
This is uncomfortable for the government, not just because of the health risks of allowing protests to go ahead during a pandemic, but finding a balance between condemning any violence but backing calls for equality. And with no specific list of demands from protesters for the government, it's not straightforward for it to answer. Recent days have been neither the beginning nor the end of the country's conversation about race. The future is written every day, but history features pain and pride. Laura Kuhnsberg, BBC News, Westminster.